There is a particular cruelty in being ruined slowly, in a bright room, while 300 people pretend not to watch. A slap is honest. A whispered arrangement, a spilled cup, a stained gown, a laugh that ripples outward like a stone dropped in still water, is not. When Sidonie Merrow felt the scalding tea bloom across her silk before the whole of the tun, she understood she was meant to be finished by morning. She did not flinch, she did not weep. And then the Duke of Aldemir, who was said to love nothing, crossed the floor and offered her his arm. Sidonie Merrow had learned young that the world reveals itself only to those who trouble to watch it. While other girls practiced the pianoforte, she studied faces, the flicker that arrives just before a lie, the way a man's hands betray what his mouth denies. The half-second a hostess needs to decide whether you are worth her civility. It was not a gift anyone had wished on her. Governesses had named it insolence. Her father had called it uncanny. And then, when the debts closed over him like water, he had called it nothing at all, for he was gone. At 23, she was the poor relation of a poor house, a gentleman's daughter with a dead gentleman, a mortgaged cottage in Hampshire, and a younger sister, Clemence, whose entire future balanced upon a single improbable fact. If Sidonie fell tonight, Clemence fell with her, into a governess's grey life at best, and into something Sidonie would not name at worst. 3 months passed. Kester Vane, Duke of Aldemir, the coldest and most courted man in England, had offered for her. No one understood it. Sidonie, least of all. They had met precisely twice, and on both occasions he had looked not quite at her, as though she stood a little to the left of wherever his gaze had settled. He had asked her strange, sideways questions. He had listened to her answers with an attention that unsettled her far more than any flattery. Then a letter had come, sealed in grey wax, and her aunt had wept with relief, and Clemence had a future once more. Sidonie knew what the tun whispered, that she had trapped him, that she was a schemer, a nobody, a country mouse who had somehow bewitched a duke. That the engagement was an error he would correct the instant a better woman reminded him of it. Tonight they meant to remind him. She smoothed the pale silk of her gown, the finest thing she had ever worn, paid for out of Aldemir's own coffers, and did not permit herself to love it too well. In her experience, the loveliest things were the first the world came to take. She had dressed for a betrothal ball. She suspected she had been summoned to a hanging. The only question that remained was whether she would be permitted to choose the rope. The reception was held at Wexcombe House, and that alone told Sidonie a great deal. Lady Wexcombe was the season's great arbiter, a woman who could unmake a girl with one lifted eyebrow, and had done so for sport. She was also aunt to Lady Adeline Vassar, and Lady Adeline Vassar had, until 3 months ago, considered herself the certain next Duchess of Aldemir. Sidonie had never exchanged a word with her. She had not needed to. She had watched her once across a crowded assembly, and catalogued the whole of her in a glance. The beauty that memory could not exaggerate, the rehearsed sweetness, and beneath it, cold as a blade left out in frost, a patience that meant harm. Adeline had not raged when the betrothal was announced. Women who rage are seldom dangerous. Adeline had smiled, and sent flowers and begun to wait. Tonight the waiting was over. Sidonie could feel it in the very air of the house, the way one feels a storm before the first drop falls. In the 2 bright chandeliers, the footmen placed a fraction too precisely. The guests already half turned toward the doors to watch her enter. She did not yet know the shape the ruin would take, only that it had been prepared with care, and that care, in a house like this one, was never kind. Of the Duke himself, she knew chiefly what everyone knew, which was to say rumor, dressed as fact. They called him the Winter Duke. It was said he had not danced in 6 years. It was said he had once dismissed a betrothed at the very altar, without a word of explanation. It was said he kept always to the edges of rooms, close by the walls, and looked through people rather than at them, and that this was pride. Sidonie was not certain it was pride. She had noticed both times they met that he counted his steps, that he turned toward a voice a beat before he found the face it belonged to, that in bright rooms his eyes performed a thing for which she had no word, a searching, a strain, that no one else appeared to see. She had told no one. Some observations she had learned were currency, and currency is only ever spent once. The footmen drew back the doors. Light and music, and 300 faces spilled toward her. There would be no turning back now. And Sidonie Merrow, who had come to be ruined, lifted her chin and walked in to meet it. The ballroom at Wexcombe House was built to blind. That was Sidonie's first thought as she crossed the threshold. A room so drenched in light could be no accident. 4 great chandeliers hung like burning wheels, each bearing 100 candles, and every wall wore mirrors that doubled and redoubled the glare until the very air seemed to hum white. A woman entering such a room was meant to be seen from every side at once, with nowhere to conceal a flaw. Sidonie had passed her life in dim cottages and darker moods. She set her jaw against the brightness and walked on. Lady Wexcombe waited at the head of the room like a toll-keeper at a bridge. She was handsome in the way of old silver, hard, cold, and polished, long past the point of warmth. She let Sidonie approach the full length of the floor before she deigned to notice her, so that 100 guests might observe the country nobody make her long walk quite alone. Miss Merrow, Lady Wexcombe's voice carried further than it needed to. How brave of you to come, and in such a gown. One would scarcely know your circumstances at all. It was a blade wrapped in muslin. Half the room heard it, the half that did not would hear of it within the hour. The insult worked upon 2 levels at once, a reminder that the gown was not truly hers, and a reminder that everyone present knew it. Sidonie had been insulted by experts. Lady Wexcombe was merely well practiced. "You are too kind, my lady," she said, and curtsied to precisely the depth the woman's rank required, and not 1 degree lower. I confess I nearly did not attend, but it seemed unkind to deprive so many people of the evening. They had so clearly gone to such trouble to prepare. For half a heartbeat, something flickered behind Lady Wexcombe's eyes. Surprise. Recalculation. She had expected a mouse, and the mouse had shown a tooth. Then the practiced smile returned. "Do enjoy yourself, Miss Merrow. While you can. So the thing was set for tonight." Sidonie had suspected as much. Now she knew it for certain. She inclined her head, moved past into the glittering crush, and began, as she always did, as she could not help but do, to read the room. It came to her in pieces, the way such things always did. Lady Ottilie Vassar stood near the center of the floor, radiant in ice blue, holding court with the serene confidence of a woman who already knows how the evening ends. She was not watching Sidonie. That was the tell. Everyone else in the room stole glances at the Duke's disgraced little bride, but Ottilie gazed elsewhere with studied indifference, which meant Ottilie did not need to look, because Ottilie knew precisely where Sidonie would be standing when it happened. Sidonie followed the line the other woman was so carefully not looking along. A footman. Young, stiff, sweating beneath the lights, holding a tray of tea things a fraction too high and standing a fraction too still, near the room's brightest quarter, the exact spot toward which the crowd's slow eddy would carry Sidonie within a minute or two. His eyes kept darting to Adeline, waiting for a signal. He was no servant of the house. His livery did not quite match the others. A man hired for one task, who would be gone before the tea had cooled on the floor. There it was. The whole machine, laid bare, 10 heartbeats before it moved. And then Sidonie saw the second thing, the thing no one else among 300 people had noticed, the thing that changed everything. She saw the Duke. Kester Vane stood where rumor had promised, at the wall, beside a pillar, an untouched glass of wine in his hand. And he was in trouble. In all that murdering light, his eyes wore the fixed, straining look of a man staring into fog. His free hand rested against the pillar. Not idly, she understood, but for purchase. A knot of laughing guests had drifted between him and the wall he had been steering by, and cut him adrift in the middle of a room he could no longer read. His jaw was tight. A sheen of effort stood on his brow. In a minute, perhaps less, he would have to move, and he would not know which way was safe, and he would do it before the eyes of everyone who mattered. 2 disasters, winding toward each other like the hands of a clock toward the hour. Sidonie had exactly 1 moment in which to choose, and only time enough to choose the once. The footman moved, and so did Sidonie. She had time to do one of 2 things. She could step back, save the gown, save the borrowed silk, let the tea splash harmlessly to the parquet, and, in the same instant, leave every eye in the room free to swing toward the tall man gripping a pillar in the corner with the lost look of a blind man in a burning house. Or she could step forward. She stepped forward. She would tell herself afterward that she had not so much decided it as recognized it, the way one recognizes a face. That some cold, quick part of her had already run the arithmetic and found that a ruined gown was a far cheaper thing than a ruined Duke. But in the moment, there was no arithmetic. There was only the small, precise turn of her shoulder into the path of the falling tray, so that the whole scalding flood of it took her square across the bodice, and the tray clattered, and she cried out, a real cry, for it burned, and 300 faces snapped toward the sound. Toward her, away from him. For one endless breath the ballroom held perfectly still, and Sidonie Merrow stood at the center of it, drenched and steaming, her borrowed silk blooming an ugly brown from collar to hem, her hair coming loose, her face white with pain. Somewhere a woman laughed, a bright, silver, rehearsed laugh, and like a struck match it caught, and the whole room began, softly, and then, not softly at all, to titter. It was, Sidonie thought, with the strange clarity that pain sometimes brings, a very well-made trap. She had walked into it with her eyes open, which was more than most of its architects could say. Adeline had wanted her wet, ridiculous, and alone. 2 out of 3. Sidonie would take that bargain. The laughter found its rhythm now. It came from behind fans and gloved hands, from young men who would repeat the story as their own, and old women who had waited all season for a girl to fall. Lady Adeline Vassar did not laugh at all. She only watched, her ice-blue skirts, unmarked, her chin at the angle of a woman receiving a gift she had ordered weeks in advance. It was the stillness that gave her away, the deep, contented stillness of a hunter who has heard the trap spring exactly on time. She did not weep. She had promised herself that much. Whatever they did to her, she would not give them the tears. She lifted her chin and let them laugh, and began to compose in her mind the dignified sentence with which she would excuse herself from the room and from society forever. She never had the chance to say it, for the crowd between the pillar and the floor had parted at the commotion, everyone turning to look, and in turning, stepping aside and into the cleared space, following the sound of her voice, as surely as a man crossing a dark room toward a single candle, came the Duke of Aldermere. He walked slowly. Sidney, who now understood why, saw that he counted, a small tightening at the corner of his mouth on every second step, the private metronome of a man measuring a floor he could not see. To everyone else it looked like nothing but the unhurried approach of the most powerful man in England. He crossed the whole width of that terrible bright room, without once faltering, and stopped directly before her, close enough that she might have counted the gray threads at his temple, and he looked down at her, not through her. At her. However, he managed it. Whatever narrow, failing aperture of sight remained to him, he found her face, and held it. The laughter died, as though a door had been shut upon it. "Miss Marrow," said the Duke of Aldermere, in a voice pitched to reach every corner of the silence. "Forgive me. I kept you waiting on the far side of the room, and left you to the mercy of Lady Wexcombe's footmen, who I see are as clumsy as her wit." A sound went through the crowd, the small, delicious intake of breath that comes just before a scandal turns itself inside out. Then Kester Vane did the thing that would be repeated in every drawing-room in London by noon of the following day. He did not summon a servant. He did not step back from the ruin of her gown. He drew off his own coat, unhurried, deliberate, and settled it about her soaked shoulders with his own 2 hands, covering the stain, the shaking, the shame, all of it in dark, superfine that smelled of cedar and cold air. And then he offered her his arm. "Come," he said, only to her, beneath the words meant for the room. "Walk with me. I find I cannot manage this floor without you." Sidonie looked up at him. She understood in that instant that the sentence had 2 meanings, and that only she, in all the world, was meant to hear the second. "I cannot manage this floor without you." Not gallantry, not even kindness. The plain truth of a man adrift in the light, asking the one person who had seen it to be his eyes to the far door, she slid her hand into the crook of his arm, and she felt it, the thing the whole watching ton would never see. She felt his fingers close over her hand, where it lay upon his sleeve, and grip hard, harder than any courtesy required. Felt the fine tremor in him, felt him settle a portion of his weight and his direction and his trust upon her as a man leans upon a rail above a long drop. He was not steadying her, she was steadying him. And something turned over in her chest that she had no name for and did not trust. A warmth she had spent 10 years learning to do without. She had come into this room resigned to being the object of a cruelty. She had not once, on the long, cold ride into London, prepared herself for the possibility of being needed. It undid her far more thoroughly than the tea had. She kept her face perfectly still because 300 people were watching and gave nothing away. Together, at a measured and unhurried pace, the Winter Duke and his ruined bride walked the length of Lady Wexcombe's ballroom, through the parted, silenced, astonished crowd, past Lady Ottoline Vassar, whose serene smile had set into something brittle and terrible, and out through the great doors into the cool dark of the hall beyond, arm in arm. As though the entire spectacle had been arranged for their private amusement, and no one else's, they saw a duke lay claim. They did not see the truth beneath it, and that was the whole art of the thing. That the grandest gesture in the room was also, secretly, the most desperate. Lady Wexcombe stood frozen by the orchestra with her practiced smile curdling on her face, unable to cut a woman the Duke of Aldermere had chosen before them all, and unable to bear that she could not. It was not until the doors had swung shut behind them, and the roar of the room had dwindled to a muffled sea, that the Duke exhaled, and his grip on her hand eased by a degree, and he said, quietly, in an altogether different voice, "You saw." It was not a question. Sidonie, standing in a stranger's coat in a darkened hall with tea cooling against her skin, her whole reputation remade in 90 seconds from ruin to legend, considered how much to admit. "I see a great many things, Your Grace," she said. "I have found it wiser, mostly, to say that I don't." He led her, or she led him. In the empty corridor, it was difficult to say which, to a small side parlor off the main hall, a cold room with a dead hearth and dust-sheeted furniture, the sort of room a great house keeps and never uses. He found the door by trailing his fingertips along the wainscot. Once inside, with the door shut, something in his bearing changed. The public duke, the granite monument, set himself down, and what remained was only a tired man of 35, with a fine tremor in his hands and another person's humiliation drying on his sleeve. "There is a lamp on the table to your left," Sidonie said. "Shall I?" A pause, then dryly. "You may as well. You appear to have appointed yourself already." She lit it. The small flame was kinder than the chandeliers had been. In its glow, his eyes lost their strained, hunted look and settled into something merely watchful. Pale gray, she saw, the color of a winter sky, and about as warm. But they moved when she moved. Whatever he had lost, he had not lost all of it. Not yet. "How much can you see?" she asked. She did not soften it. In her experience, people in pain preferred a plain question to a pitying one. He studied her a long moment, as though weighing whether to have her removed from the house. "In a room like that one," he said at last, "faces beyond a few feet are a smear. Bright light unmakes what little I keep. I know a floor by counting it, a house by memorizing it, a man by his voice. It has been failing me some 6 years now. I have perhaps a year or two of anything useful remaining, and the physicians will not promise even that." He said it flatly, a quartermaster reading an inventory. "You are the second living soul to be told. The first was a woman I was once to marry. She left. She recoiled," he corrected. "She looked at me as though I had lied to her merely by existing. I released her from the engagement that same night at St. George's, with the guests already seated. I have been the Winter Duke, the man who abandons brides at the altar, ever since I found the reputation more comfortable than the truth. A man they believe cruel, they leave in peace. A man they believe afflicted, they pity, and pity. Miss Marrow is only contempt wearing gloves." Sidonie thought of her father, and the neighbors who had brought soup, and worn that precise expression. "Yes," she said, "it is." Something eased, by a fraction. In his shoulders she had passed a test. She had not been told she was sitting. "3 months ago," he went on, "I came into Hampshire on a matter of business, and was made to endure a dinner at your aunt's table. You sat across from me. Everyone else spent the evening pretending not to notice that I never once looked directly at the centerpiece, the footman, or my own cards. You noticed inside a quarter hour. I watched you notice. And then, this is the remarkable part, I watched you decide to say nothing and move the salt cellars a few inches, so that I might find my glass without groping after it, and turn the conversation to my good side, without one soul at that table understanding what you had done." He paused. "I have commanded men in the field. I have never wanted anything in my life so plainly as I wanted. That night, never again to sit at a table where you were not. The bareness of it stopped her breath. It was not a compliment. It was something rarer. an accounting, honest to the farthing. "So, you offered for me," she said slowly, "not in spite of the fact that I saw, because of it. And you let 300 people believe you had run mad or been trapped sooner than tell a single one of them why." "I would rather be thought a fool for wanting you," said the Duke, "than an invalid for needing you. Tonight, in that room, I was very near to both." He turned his face toward the lamp, or through it. "Understand me. I did not cross that floor to rescue you. I will not build a marriage on a lie, even a flattering one, so hear the truth of it. I heard you cry out, and I knew where the sound was, and I understood at once that you had put yourself beneath that tray on purpose, to turn the room away from me. You spent your own ruin to buy me a moment's cover. No one has done such a thing for me in 6 years. I crossed the floor because I could not, in honor, let you pay that price alone." Sidonie sat down rather suddenly on the edge of a dust-sheeted chair. For a while neither of them spoke. The muffled orchestra sawed on beyond the walls. Somewhere out there Lady Ottiline was salvaging what she could of her evening, and Lady Wexcombe was deciding how best to describe all this to her friends. "They will not let it rest," Sidonie said finally. "You know that what you did in there was magnificent, and it has made everything worse. By covering me with your coat, you told the whole of London that the Duke of Aldermere claims a woman who was publicly disgraced. Ottiline meant to make me ridiculous. You have made me dangerous. She will not forgive it. She will come again, harder, and next time she will aim at you. Then let us give her something worth her aim." He leaned forward. In the lamplight, the tiredness had burned off him, and what remained was sharp and alive, and she realized with a small shock, enjoying itself. "You have described my position with perfect accuracy. Allow me to describe yours. You have a sister whose whole future rests on this match. You have no fortune, no protector, and as of 90 seconds ago, a reputation that will either destroy you or crown you, depending entirely upon what comes next. You cannot go back to being the invisible Miss Marrow. That woman drowned in a cup of tea. The only road left open to you runs directly through me. You are not," Sidonie observed, "a comforting man." "No, I am an accurate one. Here is my proposal, and it is a true one, so hear the whole of it before you answer." He raised a hand and counted upon his fingers, and she noted that even this, the small vanity of a man who liked his arguments in order, he did partly by touch. "You will marry me, not as an ornament, and not as a nurse. As my wife, and as the one pair of eyes in England I trust at my back. In public you will be my duchess, and no footman with a tray will ever come near you again, for to insult you will be to insult me, and I am not a man that tongue insults twice. In private, you will help me hold what is mine for as long as I can hold it, my estates, my seat, my name, and when the dark comes down fully, as it will, you will help me meet it on my feet. In return, you shall have my name, my protection, my fortune, and a home for your sister, to the end of her days. It is not a love match. I will not insult your understanding by dressing it as one. It is an alliance, but an honest alliance between the only two people in that ballroom tonight who saw the whole of the board." Sidonie was quiet a long moment. She was thinking, absurdly, of the pale silk gown, ruined now past saving, and how she had warned herself not to love it. She was thinking that she had spent her whole life reading other people so that she might never be caught out, never be at anyone's mercy, and that here at last was a man offering her the one thing she had never once been given, to be prized for the very quality that had always made her strange. "There is a term you have not stated," she said. He went very still. She had felt it circling the whole conversation, the shape of a thing he had not put into words. The way a room has a fourth wall you cannot see and yet know is there. He had told her of his eyes. He had told her of the jilted bride, the offer, the arithmetic of pity. He had told her, with brutal plainness, that it was not love. And all of it had been true, and none of it the whole truth. For a man does not commit to memory the way a stranger shifts the salt at dinner, unless something in him has already decided. But she was not fool enough to name it aloud while he would not. Some observations were currency, and she had the sudden, warming intuition that this was one she might, in time, spend well. "Whatever it is," she said instead, and rose and crossed the room, and put out her hand to him, palm up the way one offers a hand to a man who must first find it before he can take it. "You may keep it, Your Grace, for now. I shall have terms of my own, and I will want them set down in writing. But my answer is yes." His hand found hers, closed around it. Warm and steady, now the tremor gone. "Kester," he said, "I beg your pardon, my name. You are about to marry me, and audit my accounts, and quite possibly preserve my life on a nightly basis. I find I would rather not be Your Grace to the one person alive who knows the truth of me." The corner of his mouth shifted, not a smile. Not quite, but the raw material of one. The ghost of the man. He must have been before the light began to fail. Say it, only the once. "I should like to hear how it sounds in a voice I have reason to trust." "Kester," said Sidonie Merrow, and in that cold, dust-sheeted parlor, with a stranger's coat about her shoulders and 100 waiting lies beyond the door, the Winter Duke smiled at last. A true one, brief and astonishing, that broke across his hard face like sun across a frozen field, and for the first time in a very long while, neither of them stood alone. They were married 11 days later by special license in the small stone chapel of Aldermere House, with the curtains drawn against the London afternoon. Sidonie understood the curtains before Kester explained them. Drawn against the low autumn sun, the chapel fell into a soft, even gloom in which his ruined eyes could manage. And so, on the one day of her life a woman is meant to be looked at. She was married in the half-dark, and it was the first time her husband had truly seen her face. He stood very close as they spoke their vows, closer than the vicar thought seemly, and when he lifted her veil his hand did not fumble even slightly, because she had told him, in a murmur only he could hear, "3 steps, and I am directly before you." He found her cheek with his palm, as though he had done it 1,000 times. There were 4 witnesses. Corliss, the Duke's man, a broad, graying old soldier who had carried Kester off a field in Spain, and had guessed the secret of his eyes long before anyone spoke of it, and guarded it with a dragon's jealousy ever since. Mrs. Pell, the housekeeper whose grim face had cracked exact once at the words, "Till death us do part." And Clemence, brought up from Hampshire in a new blue pelisse, who wept without shame and clung to her sister afterward and whispered, "He is so grand, Sido, and he looks at you as though you invented the morning." Sidonie did not correct her. But she thought, "He cannot see me across a room. What he does is rarer. He listens." The first weeks at Aldermere House were an education in a country of 2. She learned the great house the way a cartographer learns a coast. Every stair counted, every threshold measured, the exact number of paces from his study door to his chair, from the chair to the window, from the window to the shelf, where he kept the miniature of his mother he could no longer make out, but would not put away. She had the footman rebuked for moving so much as a fire screen out of its place, and within a fortnight Aldermere House ran to an order so precise that a stranger would have thought it merely very well kept. Only Sidney and Corliss knew that the order was a map, and the map was a man's dignity. And they built, between them, a language. It began by necessity, and became, quickly, something like a game. A single press of her fingers on his forearm meant stop. 2 meant a step down. Her hand sliding to the inside of his elbow meant someone approaches on your right, and you will not know them. She learned to name people in the flow of ordinary talk. Why, Lord Denby, how well you look, so that Kester heard the name before he was expected to know the face. To the ton, the Duke of Aldermere had merely acquired a devoted young wife who could not bear to leave his side. No one guessed that the devotion was a lantern. She grew so fluent in him that she frightened herself. At a crush at Carlton House, she named 40 guests to him in the space of an hour, each folded invisibly into ordinary talk, and he greeted everyone by name and rank and the health of their relations, and the word went round that the Duke of Aldermere, so long a recluse, had come back to the world sharper than he left it. Only Sidney saw the cost, the fine sweat at his temple, the white-knuckled grip on his cane, and only Sidney knew that every face she gave him she also kept, filed away entire, in the strange, bottomless archive of her memory. She had never in her life forgotten a face or a hand, or a folded paper glimpsed across a table. It had made her, as a girl, unbearable to her governesses. It was about to make her, though she did not yet know it, the most dangerous thing in London. The test came at their first dinner. They gave it a month after the wedding, a deliberate thing, a flag, planted. 20 guests, the sort of people whose opinion made weather in London. And among them, seated by Sidney's own careful design where she could watch him, was Sir Julian Frayne, a smiling, clever man who was known to be a great friend of Lady Ottiline Vassar, and who had, she was quite certain, come for one reason only, to discover whether the whispers were true. She saw him make his move over the second course. He waited until the table's talk was loud, then slid the Duke's wine-glass a hand's breadth to the left of where it belonged, and sat back to watch the great man grope for it. Sidney did not hurry. She finished her sentence to the bishop's wife. Then she laughed, lightly, reached across as though to make a point, and set her own glass down at Kester's right hand, precisely where his had been.
"Do try the claret, my love," she said. "It is at your hand."
Kester's fingers closed around the glass without a flicker. "So it is," he said, and drank, and turned to Sir Julian with the cool, level, faintly bored gaze that had frozen better men. "You were saying, Frayne, something about the harvest, I think. Do go on. I find myself fascinated." Sir Julian went rather pale, and went on, and did not touch the glasses again. Later, when the last carriage had rattled from the square and the candles were guttering, Kester found her in the drawing-room by following the sound of her breathing, and lowered himself into the chair beside hers. "He moved my glass," he said. "He did. And you moved yours." "I did." A silence. Then in the dark, for she had put out the lamps, a habit she was forming, of meeting him in the country where they were equal, she heard him laugh. Low, rusty, astonished, as though the sound surprised him as much as it did her. "Sidney Vane," said the Duke of Aldermere, "you are the most dangerous woman in England, and no one but I will ever know it." "That," she said, "is rather the point. You should sleep," she told him. "I cannot sleep. I have been thinking." She heard him shift toward her voice. "When I was a boy, before any of this, I believed a marriage was a thing you endured for the sake of an heir and a name, a treaty between two houses signed in a church. My father's was so. My mother died of it slowly, over 30 years, in a house full of servants, and not one soul who knew her. A pause. I did not think, when I offered for you, that I was offering anything but the same, a treaty, a useful arrangement between two people the world had discarded. And now I find, he said, with the careful precision of a man stepping onto ice, that I look forward to the evenings. That is all. I merely note it. For the accounts, Sidonie smiled into the dark and did not tell him that she had noted precisely the same thing weeks ago, and had been carrying it about like a coal in her pocket ever since, half afraid of the burn. She did not tell him the other thing she had noticed that night, that Sir Julian had left with a folded paper in his glove that he had not arrived with, passed to him by a footman who was not one of theirs. She turned the footman's face over in her memory, filed it beside another face she had catalogued once in a blaze of chandelier light, and said nothing at all. Some observations were currency, and she had the growing suspicion she would need every coin. The whispers began with the weather turning. They were clever whispers. Sidonie gave Ottoline that. A cruder enemy would have called the Duchess of Aldermere a schemer, a fortune hunter, a nobody in stolen silk. Ottoline did nothing so useful. Ottoline whispered about the Duke. It reached Sidonie first through Clemence, wide-eyed over the breakfast chocolate. They are saying the most dreadful thing, Sido. They are saying your husband is going blind, that he cannot see his hand before his face, that you married him only to be his keeper, and that between you, the dukedom is being run by a woman and a blind man, and it is a scandal, and something ought to be done. Something ought to be done. That was the phrase that mattered. Not gossip's usual verdict, how shocking, but something ought to be done. Someone had put purpose behind the poison. And a rumor with purpose has an author, and an author has a motive, and Sidonie had spent her whole life reading for motive. The whisper reached open air a week later at Lady Marchbank's card party, and Sidonie learned there exactly how the thing was meant to kill them. They were at the whist tables when a Mrs. Deverell, a thin, avid woman who traded in other people's misfortunes the way some women trade in lace, leaned across the green baize and said, in a carrying voice designed to be overheard, "Your Grace, do forgive me, but one hears the strangest things. That the Duke cannot make out his own cards, that you must play his hand for him, like a nurse with a child. I am sure it is nonsense. I do so hope it is nonsense." The table went quiet, every ear in the room bent toward them. It was. Sidonie understood the whole campaign in miniature, not an accusation, but a kindness. Poison served with a spoon. Impossible to strike without seeming to strike a friend. Kester's hand tightened on his cards, where he could not read them. Sidonie did not hesitate. She laughed, warm, unbothered, delighted, and laid down her husband's winning hand as though she had merely leaned to admire it. "Deverell, you are too droll. My husband plays a sharper hand than any man in London. I lean across only to steal a look at his cards, which he will never show me, the wretch, and which have just cost me a guinea. Kester, my love, do tell Mrs. Deverell what you told me at breakfast, about the folly of believing everything one is paid to repeat." "Willingly," said Kester, turning his blind, level gaze upon Mrs. Bligh. Deverell with such cool command that the woman physically drew back. "A rumor, madam, is only ever as respectable as the purse that pays for it. I have found it a useful rule. I commend it to you." The table laughed with them, not at them. And Mrs. Deverell's face soured, and the moment passed, and they had won. But Sidonie's hands were cold beneath the table, because she had counted the faces that laughed and the faces that did not, and there were far too many of the second kind, and every one of them belonged to a friend of Lady Adeline Vassar. She found it 3 days later. At the opera they went, because to stay away would confess the fear. Kester, in black, magnificent and remote. Sidony on his arm in Aldermere sapphires, guiding him up the great staircase with a pressure of her fingers that read, to any watcher, as a bride's fond clinging. In the crush of the crowded foyer, precisely the sort of bright, seething room that unmade him, she felt his hand tighten on hers, felt the old fog close over him, and she talked him through it step by murmured step, and no one saw, and they reached their box, and she thought they had come through clean. They had not, for as the lamps dimmed and the curtain rose, a man leaned into the Duke's box uninvited, and settled himself in the empty chair, as though it were his own. He was fair, and soft about the jaw, and dressed a shade too richly, and he smelled of the particular cologne worn by men who are always slightly in debt. Sidney knew him before he spoke, because she had made it her business to know everyone who might one day cost them anything. Ambrose Vane, the Duke's cousin, and, until a childless Kester should get himself a son, the heir presumptive to the dukedom of Aldermere. Cousin, said Ambrose warmly, and the new Duchess. How radiant, how attentive. His eyes, pale and clever, like Kester's, but with none of the iron behind them, moved between them, missing nothing. I confess I have been anxious for you, Kester. The whole town is anxious for you. These rumors of your health, your eyes, they distress me exceedingly. How kind, said Kester, not turning his head. You may set your distress aside. I am perfectly well, are you? Ambrose's voice dropped, silky and terrible. Then you will not object, of course, to setting the matter to rest. For your own protection, cousin, for the good name of the family. A gentleman I know, a physician, most respected, has been asking whether the Duke of Aldermere is truly competent to manage estates of such size, or whether he is being, how shall I say, led, guided. His gaze slid deliberately to Sidney. There is a process for such things, you know, a commission, physicians, a magistrate, sworn testimony. To determine whether a man is capable of governing his own affairs, or whether he ought to be governed. I should hate to see it come to that, but the family has begun to feel that something ought to be done. There it was. The whole machine laid bare, exactly as the footman's tray had been laid bare a lifetime ago in Lady Wexcombe's ballroom, not a rumor. A weapon, and a wielder, and a purpose. To have Kester declared incapable, stripped of the governance of his own estates, and the whole of Aldermere delivered by law into the hands of the man sitting uninvited in his box. And behind Ambrose, Sidney did not need to look, but she looked. In a box, across the great dark theatre, sat Lady Ottoline Vassar, watching them through opera glasses she did not need, wearing the serene, contented stillness of a hunter who has heard the second trap spring on time. So, that was the alliance. The spurned beauty and the greedy heir. Ottoline could not be Duchess of Aldermere while Kester lived and Sidney reigned. But she could help unmake them both, and marry the new duke, and take the coronet by the back door. It was elegant. It was, Sidney thought, with the cold clarity that came to her in the worst moments, very nearly perfect. Kester rose. He did it beautifully, Sidney's hand at his elbow reading the way, and stood over his cousin to his full height, and the whole theatre, she was aware, had begun to watch the Duke's box rather than the stage. "Get out of my chair, Ambrose," he said pleasantly, "before I have you removed from it. And when you send your physician, send him to Aldermere by daylight, and I will show him ledgers in my own hand, and estates that have doubled their yield since my father's day, and he may make what he likes of a blind man's accounts."
"By daylight,"
Ambrose murmured, rising, smiling, unbothered. "Yes, we shall want daylight. A great deal of it. Good evening, Cousin Duchess." He bowed and was gone. Sidonie sat very still in the dark, the music swelling meaninglessly below, and understood two things at once. The first was that they had, until the commission convened, a matter of weeks, no more, to prove, before magistrates and physicians and the whole prying world, that the Duke of Aldermere could see well enough to govern. The second was that he could not, and that everyone with eyes would soon know it. The break, when it came at night, which was the only mercy in it. She had not slept properly in a fortnight. The commission's shadow lay over the house like weather. The servants had begun to speak in the hushed voices of a place with a sickness in it, and Kester had withdrawn day by day into a granite silence she could not reach, working himself past exhaustion at estate business by daylight and lying wakeful, she suspected. Through the nights, she had let him have the silence, because she knew the shape of a proud man's dread, and knew that crowding it only drove it deeper. But there was a difference between silence and this cold, unlit stillness, and every instinct she owned was ringing like a struck glass. Sidonie woke to a house too quiet. She had learned in her months at Aldermere to sleep as her husband slept, lightly listening, and the wrongness of the silence had her up and in her wrapper before she had decided to move. His chamber was empty, the bedclothes cold. Corliss she found nodding in a chair by the servant's stair, and she did not wake him. She knew where Kester would be. The study door stood ajar. No light showed beneath it. She pushed it open and found him sitting at his desk in the total dark, perfectly upright, perfectly still, with a branch of candles before him, unlit. The fire had died to embers. He had not rung for anyone. He had simply come down in the black of the night and sat, hour upon hour, in a darkness he could no longer tell from the failing of his own eyes. "I could not find the tinderbox," he said without turning. His voice was terrible in its evenness. "I sat here, Sidonie, in my own study, in my own house, and I could not find the tinderbox to light my own candle. And after a while I understood that it did not signify, because the candle would have made no difference. It has got worse. This last week, it has got a great deal worse." She said nothing. She crossed the room by memory. She too could walk it in the dark now. And she did not go to the mantel for a light. She went instead to the desk, and she pinched out the one thing in the room that still glowed. She took the poker and killed the last red eye of the embers, so that the darkness in the study became complete and absolute and shared. "What are you doing?" he said sharply. "If you cannot have the light tonight," said Sidonie, "then neither shall I. I am tired of being the only one who can see." "It is lonely work," she heard him breathe. She found the second chair by touch, and drew it close to his, and sat, and in the perfect dark, she reached out, until she found his hand where it lay clenched on the desk, and she covered it with her own, and she waited. For a long while he did not speak. When at last he did, the iron had gone out of him, and what was left was the thing he had hidden from the whole world for 6 years, the plain fear of a proud man. "I dream of it," he said. "The end of it. Not pain. I could bear pain. I have borne pain. It is the smallness. A duke led about his own gardens by the hand. A duke who cannot read his children's faces, should I ever be fool enough to have any. A duke declared, by law incapable, a ward in his own dukedom, signed away to Ambrose, while I sit in a chair by a window I cannot see out of, and am brought my soup. I have spent my life being the one others leaned upon. I do not know how to be a thing that is carried. His hand turned under hers and gripped. I have done you a great wrong, Sidney. I told you it was an alliance. I dressed it up as a bargain, eyes for a name, and let you sign your life to a sinking ship because I was too much a coward to face the dark. Alone. You should have taken your sister and run the moment the ink was dry on the settlements. Run where and on whose money, she said. You are thinking of some other woman. I had nowhere on this earth to run to. That was always rather the point. A sound broke out of him that was half a laugh and half a sob. Kester. She said his name in the dark, and it steadied him. She had noticed long ago that it did. Listen to me, for I shall only say it plainly the once. You did not trap me. I have been trapped before. I know exactly what it feels like. And this is its opposite. In my whole life I have been useful to people who despised me, and ornamental to people who did not know me, and a burden to people who wished me gone. You are the first living soul who ever looked at the thing I am, the watching, the noticing, the strangeness of me, and called it precious instead of unnatural. You did not marry a nurse, you married a partner. And a partner does not run when the ship takes water. She learns where the pumps are. You are not carried, she said. Hear me, Kester, because I will not soften it, and I will not say it twice. I have spent my whole life among people who were carried. My aunt who has never had an original thought, or lifted a finger she was not forced to. A dozen fine ladies who cannot dress themselves or add a column of figures or survive an hour without a servant at their elbow. That is being carried. You govern 3 counties. You doubled their yield where your father let the land rot, and you did it blind. You are the least carried man I have ever known, and if you ever again compare yourself to a bundle of soup-fed helplessness in a chair, I shall grow genuinely cross, and you have not yet seen me cross. I begin to think I should like to avoid it. You should. Wiser men have, he laughed. A real one this time, cracked and unwilling and real, and some of the terrible stillness went out of him. And when the dark is total, his voice was very low, when I cannot see even the shape of you against a window, what then, Sidney? Then she said, you shall do what you are doing now. You shall find my hand in the dark. It will always be there. That is not gratitude, and it is not pity, and it is not a bargain. I have run the sums 100 times, and they always come out the same, and I am never wrong about sums. She was crying, she found, quite silently, in the dark where he could not see it, and it could not shame either of them. I love you, you impossible, arrogant, frightened man. I did not plan to. It was very inconvenient. But there it is, and I will not have it back. The silence after was different from every silence before it. Then his hand rose in the dark and found her face, unerring now learned by heart, his thumb tracing the wet track on her cheek that neither of them would ever mention. And he drew her in, and in the absolute blackness of that room, where sight counted for nothing, and touch for everything, where for once in his life he was not the man who could not see, but simply a man kissing his wife. Kester Vane kissed her, slow and certain and unafraid. When at last they drew apart, he pressed his brow to hers and laughed softly, wrecked and wondering. Say it once more, he murmured. I should like to learn the sound of it, the way I have learned everything else, by heart. In the dark, where they cannot take it from me. I love you, said Sidney Vane, and then, because she was who she was, now light the fire, Kester. We have a commission to defeat, and I have just thought of how. You said you have thought of how, Kester said, when the fire was lit again and its small warmth had crept back into the room. How to defeat them? Tell me, not yet. It is not finished. She turned the pieces over in her mind, the footman's mismatched livery, the face she had filed away in a blaze of chandelier light, the folded paper passed into Sir Julian's glove, Ambrose's soft hands and softer debts. A shape was forming out of them, the way a sum resolves when the last figure drops into its column. But it will be. They have made one mistake, Kester. The same mistake everyone has made about me my whole life. They looked at a quiet woman who notices things, and they decided that noticing was harmless. Adeline humiliated me in front of 300 people because she thought I would only weep. Ambrose plots in front of me because he thinks I am merely your eyes. Her voice went very soft and very cold. They have no notion at all of what I keep. Give me a little time and daylight and their own arrogance, and I will hand you back your enemies in pieces. The commission convened at Aldermere House on the last Thursday in November at noon, in the great south drawing-room, because Ambrose Vane had insisted upon daylight, and Kester, to everyone's surprise, had graciously agreed. They came in their sober black. Sir Everard Fitch, the commissioner, a dry stick of a man with a magistrate's cautious eyes. Dr. Holloway, the physician whose respectability Ambrose had purchased at what Sidney now knew to the shilling, a clerk to take down the testimony, and as witnesses to the family's grave and loving concern, Ambrose himself and Lady Ottiline Vassar and, arriving last, gorgeous and grim in bishop's purple, Lady Wexcombe. Who had scented blood and come to watch? The south drawing-room blazed with the thin, merciless light of a winter noon. Every curtain was drawn back. It was the cruelest room in the house for him, and they had chosen it on purpose, and Kester had let them. "Your Grace," said Sir Everard, not unkindly, "you understand the purpose of this inquiry? A petition has been laid, by your kinsman alleging that you are by reason of infirmity incapable of the management of your estates, and that you are unduly governed by others. It is my duty to satisfy myself of the truth. I shall put certain tests to you. I am sorry for it." "Do your duty, Sir Everard," said Kester, seated very straight in the flood of light that told him nothing. "I should think the worse of you if you did not." They began. Sir Everard asked the Duke to describe the painting above the mantel. Kester, who had chosen and hung it himself in the years when he could still see, described it perfectly. The hunt, the grey horse, the low autumn light, and for a moment Sidney's heart lifted until she saw Ambrose smile and understood the trap. A man may describe from memory what he can no longer see. "And the painting beside it, Your Grace," Ambrose said gently. "The small one to the left of the window, newly hung, I think, since your marriage." Sidney had hung nothing there. It was a test with no answer, a pit dug in the dark, and if Kester described a picture that was not there, he was a liar, and if he confessed he could not see it, he was blind. And either way, the room would have what it came for. "I do not discuss my wife's arrangements," Kester said after a fraction too long. "You must ask her." But the fraction had been heard. Sir Everard's pen moved. Dr. Holloway murmured something to the clerk. And Sidney watched the room tilt, degree by degree, toward the verdict that would take everything from them. The estates, the governance, her husband's freedom, delivered by law into the soft, greedy hands of the man who had dug the pit. Ottiline had crossed her ankles and folded her hands and settled deeper into contentment, and it was that. The stillness, the awful, patient stillness she had first read across a ballroom, that decided Sidney. It was time. Holloway held up a printed card and asked the Duke to read it. Kester turned his face toward it, and the silence stretched. and Sidonie, standing at the window where they had agreed she would stand, her hands folded, saying nothing, watched her husband's jaw tighten as the letters swam into gray nothing. "The light is poor," said Kester. "The light," said Ambrose softly from his chair, "is excellent, cousin." Holloway moved the candlestick that stood upon the mantel, testing whether the Duke's eyes tracked it. They did not. He passed a hand through the air, a foot from the Duke's face. Kester did not flinch. A low murmur went round the room. Ottolin's lips curved. Lady Wexcombe leaned forward. Sir Everard's dry face grew graver, and he took up his pen, and Sidonie understood that they were perhaps 2 questions from the end of everything. She stepped away from the window. "Sir Everard," she said, "before you write, I wonder if the Commission would permit the Duchess to offer testimony of her own. I am, after all, one of the others by whom my husband is said to be so unduly governed. It seems only fair I should be examined, too." Sir Everard hesitated, then inclined his head. "The Commission will hear the Duchess." "You are gracious." Sidonie moved to the center of the terrible bright room, unhurried, and she did not look at Kester, because they had agreed she would not. She looked instead at Ambrose Vane and at Ottoline, and she let them see that she was not afraid. "I will not waste the Commission's time denying what its own eyes have seen," she said. "My husband's sight is failing. There it is said aloud, and the sky has not fallen, and Aldermere still stands. He has an affliction of the eyes, progressive and incurable, and born, I will say this, though he would not, with more courage than any man in this room has been asked to find. Raz. That is the truth Ambrose Vane has spent a great deal of borrowed money to purchase. Now, permit me to tell the Commission the truth, he has spent a great deal more money to bury." She turned to Sir Everard. "On the 3rd of September last, at a reception at Wexcombe House, I was publicly humiliated, scalded with a tray of tea before 300 people. It was called an accident. It was not. The footman who carried that tray wore a livery that did not match the others in the house, because he was not a servant of that house. He was hired. I saw his face for perhaps 4 seconds." She paused. "I never forget a face, Sir Everard. It is the particular strangeness God saw fit to give me, in place of a fortune. His name is Coyle. Jonas Coyle. And I saw that same face a second time 6 weeks ago, in this very season, passing a folded paper into the glove of Sir Julian Frayne at my own dinner table. Sir Julian being, as the Commission may know, the most devoted of Lady Ottoline Vassar's friends." Ottoline's smile had gone very fixed. "One hired man," Sidonie continued, "in the pay of 2 people, performing 2 services 8 weeks apart. It seemed to me worth the trouble of finding him. My husband's man, Corliss, is resourceful, and Mr. Coyle, it transpires, is a great deal more frightened of the gallows than he is loyal to his paymasters." She drew a folded packet from her sleeve and laid it upon the table before Sir Everard. His sworn statement, witnessed and signed, payments received from Lady Ottoline Vassar for the humiliation of September, and from Mr. Asher, Ambrose Vane, for the spreading of rumor thereafter. Beside it you will find a schedule of Mr. Vane's debts, which are ruinous, and which fall due at Lady Day, debts a dukedom would very conveniently discharge. And beside that, a letter in Mr. Vane's own hand to Dr. Holloway, retaining the good doctor's services before ever a symptom was examined, at a fee I think the Commission will find instructive." The clerk had stopped writing. The room had gone entirely still. "I read that letter once, Sir Everard," Sidonie said quietly. "For perhaps a minute, over Mr. Coyle's shoulder, before he knew I had it. I could reproduce it for you word for word, should the original be mysteriously mislaid. I told you I never forget. Ambrose was on his feet. She is a schemer. This proves nothing. She has invented. Sit down, mister. Vain, said Sir Everard Fitch, and his dry voice had gone to flint. Or I shall have you removed. For a long moment, no one in the great bright room said anything at all. Then Sir Everard Fitch reached for the packet Sidonie had laid before him. Coyle's statement, the schedule of debts, the letter to Holloway, and he read, in the pitiless winter light, with the slow care of a man who has spent his life learning to tell a true document from a false one. His face, as he read, went from caution to gravity to a cold and settled anger. Dr. Holloway had begun, quietly, to edge toward the door. Sir Everard, I assure you, I had no knowledge. I was retained in good faith. I never. You were retained, said Sir Everard without looking up, before the patient was examined, at 3 times your ordinary fee by a man who stood to inherit what your diagnosis would deliver. You will remain, doctor. The commission will have a great deal to ask you. Holloway sat down as though his strings had been cut. Well, it appears to this commission, Sir Everard went on, rising, looking from the pale, sweating face of the heir to Lady Audeline Vassar, who had risen and was gathering her purple skirts to flee, that it has been convened under false pretenses, in furtherance of a conspiracy to defraud a peer of the realm of his estate. That is not a matter for physicians. That is a matter for the King's Bench. It was then, and only then, that Kester rose. He rose from his chair in the pitiless light, and he found Sidonie not by sight but by the sound of her breathing, as he had found her across a ballroom on the worst night of her life, and he crossed the room to her, counting, unhurried, unerring, and he took her hand and turned to face the wreck of his enemies. My cousin believed, he said, that a man who cannot see cannot govern. He was mistaken, and his mistake is instructive, so mark it. I have not seen a ledger clearly in 2 years. My estates have prospered. Regardless, you have the accounts, Sir Everard. Examine them at your leisure. I govern by the counsel of the sharpest mind in England, whom I was wise enough to marry, and I am not diminished by leaning upon her any more than a general is diminished by trusting his best officer. That is not incapacity, gentlemen. That is command. His hand tightened on Sidonie's. You came to learn whether the Duke of Aldemir can see. Here is your answer. I see further than any man in this room. I simply do it with her eyes as well as my own. Now get these people out of my house. Audeline Vassar was already gone. Ambrose was taken by the arm by the clerk and the impassive Corliss, who had appeared in the doorway with the quiet satisfaction of an old soldier watching a flanking maneuver come good. Lady Wexcombe went white and then went out, having remembered a great many places she would rather be. Sir Everard gathered his papers, bowed, a real bow, low to them both, and murmured, Your Grace, and followed. The great bright room emptied. The winter light poured in, telling Kester nothing, and it did not matter in the least. That night, Sidonie drew every curtain in her husband's chamber, and put out every light, and came to him in the dark that was, she had decided, their true country, the one place on earth where the two of them stood exactly equal, and always would. You are putting out the candles again, Kester said from the bed. She heard the smile in it. I find I prefer you at a disadvantage, she said, and crossed the room by heart, and sat on the edge of the mattress and found his hand. For a while, they simply breathed together in the black. The house had gone quiet around them. The enemy was routed. Corliss had seen Ambrose to a magistrate and Coyle to safekeeping. And somewhere in Hampshire, Clement slept soundly with a settled future, and no notion of how near it had come to ruin. There was nothing left to do tonight, but the one thing they had never yet done plainly, in words with nothing at stake to hide behind. "There was a term I never stated," Kester said at last. "You told me so, the first night, in Lady Wexcombe's cold little parlor. You said I had left a term unspoken, and you were right, and I let you think it was cowardice or pride. It was neither. It was that I did not yet have the right to say it, and I am a man who has always been very careful about what he has the right to. And now you have stood in a blazing room and dismantled the people who would have destroyed me, using nothing but the strangeness God gave you and a memory like a steel trap, and then turned to me and called it love. I find I have earned the right at last, so hear the term Sidonie, for I shall state it once and hold to it the rest of my life." He drew her hand to his chest over the steady beat of his heart. "I did not marry you for your eyes. That was the lie I told us both, because it was safe, and I have never in my life been brave, except when it was forced upon me. The truth is that I loved you across a dinner table in Hampshire, over a rearranged salt cellar, 3 months before I ever spoke of alliances or terms or protection. I loved you before I needed you. I would have loved you if my sight had never failed at all. I should merely have had no excuse to keep you, and I would have gone to my grave a lonelier and a stupider man. The eyes were never the reason. They were only the door. I was coward enough to walk through. Sidonie was very glad then of the dark. I have a confession of my own to make," she said, "since we are keeping accounts honestly at last. That first night, when I told you I would keep your unstated term as currency, and spend it well in time, I lied a little too. I had already spent it. I knew, walking out of that cold parlor on your arm, that I was lost. I had spent my whole life making certain I could never be surprised, could never be caught out, could read every room before I entered it, and you walked across a floor you could not see and undid the whole of it in 90 seconds. I have been furious about it, on and off, ever since." She felt him shake with silent laughter beneath her cheek. "Do not laugh. It is a serious professional failure. I am never wrong about people. And then there was you. I am sorry to have inconvenienced your calculations." "You are not sorry in the least." "No," he admitted. "I find I am the most unrepentant man in England. It is a novel sensation. I recommend it." "You memorized the salt cellars," she said, when she could trust her voice. "I memorized everything. I have told you. By heart, where they cannot take it from me." His hand rose and found her face. "I know the exact turn of your jaw when you are about to say something ruinous. I know your step on a stair among 100 others. I know the sound you make when you are trying not to weep, which you are making now, and which I love better than any sight I have lost, because it is mine, and no commission, and no cousin, and no darkness will ever take it from me. This is a very great deal of sentiment," Sidonie managed, "from a man who informed me it was not a love match. I lied. Note it in your accounts. I find I do not regret it." She laughed, and it broke in the middle, and he drew her down against him in the dark. And this time there was no room they were performing for, no ton beyond the door, no bargain, and no lie between them, only a man and his wife, who had each spent a lifetime being useful and unloved, and who had against every calculation found in one another the one thing neither had thought to want. "It is no longer an alliance," Sidonie said some while later, her head over his heart. "No, I shall want that in writing," she said. "I am owed a great many things in writing, by my reckoning." "You shall have it all in writing," said the Duke of Aldermere gravely. In my own hand badly, for I can no longer see the line, and you may correct my spelling, as you correct everything else. And we shall call it the truest contract ever drawn." He pressed his lips to her hair. "Stay, Sidonie, not because I need my eyes. Stay because I am yours, and have been since Hampshire, and will be when the dark is total, and I cannot find the window. Just stay. I told you, they always come out the same. Outside, the winter dark pressed against the windows, and inside, for the first time in either of their lives, neither of them minded it at all. Spring came late to Aldermere that year, and found the household changed. Ambrose Vane did not stand trial in the end. The family name was spared that much, but he was made to sign away every claim, present and future, to the dukedom and its estates, and he took himself and his debts to the continent, where a man may be poor more cheaply, and was not heard from again. Lady Ottilie Vassar fared little better. A conspiracy exposed is a conspiracy owned. London, which had been so eager to laugh at the drenched country nobody, discovered overnight that it had always found Lady Ottilie a trifle cold, a trifle grasping, not quite the thing. She married, within the year, a gouty baronet with a house in Northumberland and no near neighbours, which society agreed was a very suitable match, and meant precisely as much cruelty as it sounds. Lady Wexcombe, that great arbiter, was observed to speak of the Duchess of Aldermere only in the warmest terms thereafter, having a keen instinct for which way the wind had turned, for it had turned entirely. The ton, which had convened at Wexcombe House to watch a woman be finished, now sent 3 cards for every dinner the Duchess of Aldermere might deign to give. She was clever, they had decided, brilliant, even, had she not unmasked a conspiracy single-handed. She was devoted, had she not stood by her afflicted duke when a lesser woman would have fled to the courts. To be received by her was to be someone. To be cut by her was to be no one. Sidonie, who had spent 23 years learning precisely how the machine of society worked, ran it now with the same cool competence she had once brought to reading a room she was about to be humiliated in, and found it, on the whole, a great deal easier from the top. Clemence made her debut under her sister's wing, and was so plainly, unshakably beloved by the most powerful woman in 3 counties that no whisper ever came near her. She married, in time, a man she chose herself, for no better reason than that she liked him, a luxury Sidney had secured for her at the cost of a ruined silk gown, and counted the cheapest thing she had ever bought. As for the Duke's eyes, they did not mend. Sidonie had never pretended they would. She did not deal in fictions. By the following winter the last of his useful sight was gone, and the world went to Kester Vane, in sound and scent and touch, and the voice of his wife naming the shape of each day as it came. He grieved it in the private way of proud men, and then having grieved, he set it down, because a life was waiting that was far too full to spend it mourning. They found their way. He learned the whole of Aldermere by heart, every path and paddock, and rode the boundaries at Sidonie's side with a sureness that awed the tenants. He governed his estates by her eyes, and his own iron sense, and they prospered still. In the evening she read to him history and travels, and when he could be prevailed upon to admit he liked them, novels, and he would lie with his head in her lap before the fire, and correct the author's arithmetic, which was frequently poor, and she would laugh, and the great dark house would fill with a warmth it had not known in a generation. On the first anniversary of the night they met, Kester found her in the small south sitting-room, and settled beside her, and said, "Describe it to me. The reception. I have never once heard your account of the moment before I reached you." I have only ever had the rooms. So, she told him the blazing chandeliers, Odelin's contented stillness, the footman with the mismatched livery. And then the tall, remote, terrifying man at the wall, adrift and straining in the light, whom no one in 300 people had troubled to truly see. I stepped into the tea, she said, to turn them away from you. And you crossed a room you could not see, to stand by a woman the whole world had just agreed to despise. Neither of us knew the other's reason. We simply reached. She took his hand and laid it palm open upon her own. You offered me your arm, Kester. Do you know, I have thought since that it was the truest thing anyone ever did for me. Everyone else I had ever known offered me their contempt, or their pity, or their orders. You offered me your arm, and it was not because you were strong. It was because you were falling, and you trusted me to hold you up. No one had ever trusted me with anything at all. He was quiet a moment. Then he rose, and stood before her in the soft evening light that told him nothing, and mattered not one whit, and he bowed. A duke to a duchess, grave and courtly, and entirely without irony, and he offered her his arm. Then let me offer it again, he said. And every day of my life walk with me, your grace. I find I cannot manage this floor without you. Sidonie Vane rose and slid her hand into the crook of his arm, and felt his fingers close warm and certain over hers, and this time neither of them was steadying the other, or perhaps both of them were, which she had come to understand were only ever the same thing wearing different coats. They had sent her to be ruined in a bright room. It remained, to the end of her days, the finest thing that ever happened to her. If Sidonie and Kester's quiet triumph over the people who tried to destroy them left you cheering, then you already know there is nothing so satisfying as watching the overlooked, underestimated heroine claim exactly the life she was told she could never have. Wounded Duke, who learns that the greatest strength of all is letting someone in. If you loved this grounded, emotional Regency romance, do please tap that like button. It truly helps the channel grow. Share this story with anyone who believes a brilliant heroine and a swoon-worthy hero deserve their happy ending, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next immersive love story. Tell me your favorite moment in the comments below. Was it the tea, the dark, or the arm offered one last time? I read every one.